Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 33, The Major Disagreement, Pure Positive versus Balanced Training.
This is one I hear a lot. Tell me what you think about this, Mariano.
Mm-hmm.
Is that if you use corrections in your dog training, that it's not scientific.
Yeah, that's a funny one because I know exactly what pure positive trainers are referring to when they, and it's all over their marketing, right? Science-based dog training and stuff like that. It's almost synonymous, you would think, like from an advertising perspective, pure positive and science-based dog training.
Mm-hmm.
They're not wrong because there have been scientific studies that clearly suggest, not even suggest, that clearly confirm, I guess is a better word. There is nothing better, and this is what I say to my clients, is there is nothing better for shaping new behaviors than food work or positive, motivational work, right? Now, there is a caveat to that kind of thing, or certain limitations to that kind of thing that I think most dog trainers can understand. Whether they agree with it or not, I think they can at least understand where someone's coming from. But I'll dive into that a little further in the balance training section.
Yeah. Another argument that I've seen with not scientific, right? So in the dog training world, we can look at the balanced dog training spectrum itself has people who are really working really hard every single day to be as close to balance as possible. So this means, in essence, trying to follow the Lima standards, right?
Least intrusive, minimally aversive.
Least intrusive, minimally aversive, right? So this means we don't really use aversive. We use aversives minimally, and we try and use the least aversive methods so to not cause a lot of stress or pressure to that dog, right? So, you have balanced dog trainers who are really dedicated to trying to follow that standard. And then you have balanced dog trainers who are not, right? They work heavily with pressure. And then they use a couple treats here and there. And then there are some that, they work heavily with pressure. They just are tired of calling themselves, dominance based or pack based or behaviorist. So they just call themselves balanced dog trainers, right?
Right.
Again, there's a broad spectrum of balanced dog trainers. So what tends to happen is when we have such a broad spectrum of practitioners, it's really hard to have any consistent reads on a method or a technique or an idea because everything is contextual. When I give a correction, it's contextual. So it's and certain variables are not being controlled, right? When we start getting into dominance and relationship patterns, it's really hard for us to say, oh, the dog did this because he doesn't respect you, right? And when we start making corrections out of quote unquote disrespect, it's really hard to read and measure that data, right? So therefore, it's really hard to make it scientific. Now, what is scientific is we do know that dogs learn through pressure, escape and avoidance of pressure, right? It's called negative reinforcement. We definitely know that works also in a laboratory, and we definitely know that works, in real life, right? But to their point, in a controlled setting, in a repeatable way, we know that pure positive training, motivation work, the acquisition of food or something desirable, is a really great way to shape new behaviors and reinforce those behaviors, right? When we get out of that vacuum of dog training, that's when we kind of see something different, which we'll go into the balanced dog training aspects. Okay. And then another argument that we see with pure positive is we see that, and I've witnessed this in my career, things that have been shaped positively are longer lasting, and the dogs will remember them without as much need for reinforcement throughout their lives, right? So for example, when my dog was really young, I taught him a flip finish, right? And that flip finish, I started from the time that he was 8 weeks old, and I probably conditioned it for the first 4 or 5 months of his life. And he's really good at it, and he got really good at it really, really quick. And everyone who worked with him or saw him would practice it. And honestly, I haven't reinforced a flip finish now for like the last, I would say, 9 months, 10 months with any food. But my dog still does a flip finish on cue right away because it was developed that way. And he's happy to do it without any motivation, other than maybe just a little pat on the head and a little scratch on his neck. And he does it perfectly, right? But I no longer have to reward it with food. So these are some of the pure positive arguments that we've seen, in the industry and through some of the people that we know and conversations that we've had. I personally, I don't necessarily say that any of these arguments are completely wrong. Okay. Again, context is king. Context is the most important thing here. When we're dog trainers, we have to look at all the variables put together, and we have to make the right decisions based on those variables. All right. I want to take away the next section.
Sure. So now that we've broken down pure positive training and the arguments therein for it or against balanced training, we're going to do the same thing with balanced training. So here are some of the arguments laid out as we've heard them from balanced dog trainers. Balanced dog trainers, as opposed to being, force-free, they just believe in being results-based, meaning if it's ultimately what helps the dog, then I'm going to do it because I'm out to just make sure that this dog no longer lunges or jumps or whatever the case, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever that looks like, within reason anyway, I hope. So another argument would be it's faster and therefore potentially cheaper. And what I mean by that, and there's an interesting, part of that I'll dive into right at the end of this here. But what I mean by that is faster. I've definitely seen online, read about, and heard of, like personally, someone who, my dog has this issue, and this issue. I've met this many trainers, and we've done like 8-9 sessions together, and the dog just didn't get that much better. I saw improvement, but ultimately it was just, just didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Whereas a balanced training method has the potential to knock out these unwanted behaviors quickly. Mm-hmm. And because it's faster, because there are less sessions, naturally it's cheaper, right? Mm-hmm. If you guys charge $150 a lesson, regardless of the type of training method, and one takes 5 and one takes 10, the one that takes 5 is the cheaper method. Now, another argument is when you're working with training tools, at the end of the day, you have more control of your dog. If I've got an e-collar on my dog and someone else has their other dog with no sort of tool and they're both off leash, my dog has a direct line to me, whereas their dog does not. I mean, of course, they can talk to them and otherwise incentivize them with, all the different types of luring behaviors and hey, come here. And, but I have something that serves as an extra reinforcer.
Pure positive trainers aren't really having their dog off leash all the time either.
No, of course not. Well, neither are balanced dog trainers, but and that's a good point to mention. I'm just saying, at the end of the day, this is an argument that they utilize, whether or not it's necessarily, because I agree with you that none of these are necessarily 100% wrong. But if we're keeping it real, none of these are 100% right, and I think that goes for either one. Right. So me personally, as a quote unquote balanced trainer, in that I do use aversive tools as well as food work with my training clients. Mm-hmm. If I heard another balanced trainer present that as an argument, I'd be like, yeah, but really, who cares? Of all the dogs that I train, almost nobody really needs their dog to be off leash reliable 1,000% of the time, mm-hmm. and it's illegal anyway to take your dog off leash anyway, unless you're at a dog park or something, So ultimately, that's the argument, though, is at the end of the day, the whole ifs and
more control overall.
Correct, right? Should I need it? I have it. That's the argument, right? Yeah. Another one,
a pure positive would argue, why are you being a control freak?
Right?
Why do you need so much control?
Right. And it's not a ridiculous question, but I think that the clear answer, as I've understood it from other positive trainers, is for safety. Mm-hmm. So another argument then would be using certain tools can make things a lot easier for a client or owner. And I think of examples that I mean, just today I met with a dog. He's a pity. He's a rescue, sweet boy and everything. But man, that dog can pull. And when he sees other dogs or people, he gets very lungy, and that dog is strong, mm-hmm. And so we've talked about, the type of, we're going to do some lessons, and we've talked about what the process is going to look like going forward. And there will be food work in there. In fact, that'll be first, in the shaping process. But ultimately, I was explaining to them that, you guys would have such an easier time and such a safer time, frankly, because that's a pretty strong dog there.
Right.
working with a certain tool that would help you mitigate this dog's ability to do these things.
Right.
So another argument then would be balanced dog trainers consider their methods, their outlook on training as more realistic versus idealistic, in that they understand where you're coming from. Like, I get it. You don't want to punish a dog. I can appreciate that. But, and I'm speaking as like a, as like a typical balance trainer, right? So I get it, but ultimately the goal is fix this problem, right? So with that in mind, I'm going to fix the problem, whatever that looks like. I'm not really, the argument that's a little more compelling than that I think that I've heard is, I'm not going to worry so much about, like, is it mean, or whatever the case, to use like a prong collar, a star mark collar, a electric collar, because it's not nearly as mean to correct a dog as, animal control is going to be to my dog when he bites somebody.
Right.
So that's definitely an argument that I've heard. Here's an argument that's kind of more balanced, more pro-balance as opposed to anti-pure positive, is balanced dog trainers use a wider skill set, in that a good balanced dog trainer, and that's something that I wanted to kind of touch on, because you were talking about pure positive stuff, and you kind of came into the understandings of like the scientific understandings, and like how, technically speaking, pressure avoidance is science-based. It is backed by evidence, right?
Right.
Now, I do want to try to paint this, if we can, to balanced dog trainers. I'm kind of looking at this as balanced dog trainers who know their stuff, because
Right.
you're absolutely right that not only balanced dog training, but I think pure positive too, have become such kind of wide, all encompassing. Like, we've talked about this before. I've met a pure positive trainer who doesn't even think you should crate your dog, or even say the word no at all, which is like, it's just weird to me, because, if no has no context to a dog unless you build it, I don't even understand how you see that as negative, or whatever the case. But balanced dog trainers definitely have that same issue, where they're too firm, or they're too emotional, or they're too, those crazy outliers. They do exist.
They're not emotional, that's something too.
Right. But you know what I mean? Like, too emotional as in they're like, don't let this dog pull one over on you, correct the dog to make a point type thing, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And those do exist. I don't think that they're necessarily super duper mainstream or popular, but they do exist. So we have to bring that up. And with that being said, I'm speaking to more balanced dog trainers who are actually balanced, who understand the value of food, but also use other tools. And they believe in the value of using more tools, because in their heads, it's like, well, hey man, you're a rewards-based trainer. So am I. I just have other things on top of that make me more versatile than you, or make me more like reliable than you, because I can shape behaviors just like you, but then I can start correcting for unwanted behaviors, which is something you can't really do that well. Mm-hmm. The final argument that I wanted to touch on is they meaning balanced dog trainers, see it as a much safer alternative. They can mitigate risk a lot better.
Yeah.
I kind of touch on that with that same example of that pity, or similar dogs who I'm like, yeah, man, maybe this dog would be good with the remote collar because you have control in the house, or, off of a leash, and whatever the case. I think that this still somewhat ties into the timing of training, or how long it's going to take and how much money and everything else, because if you've got something that you can condition more quickly, it's like, how long do you want this bitey dog to be potentially bitey? Because each and every day that goes on, the potential for risk remains there. So that's always been one, is I'm willing to use tools that can slow down the dog as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, and as reliably as possible. And in that sort of like headspace, they believe that they are the most risk averse, which is why I see personally, I could be totally wrong. And if I am, Phil, please let us know. I'd love your input on this. And you too, Brent, if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Whenever I see people work consistently with dogs with issues, they tend to be more balanced trainers. I don't really see too many pure positive people like on YouTube and stuff like that working with dogs with severe issues.
True. Yeah. I would, and the one, well, because it's a very slow process, right? It's
right.
I took a course. Ian Dunbar had his growl class, and it's a very lengthy course, and I'm very happy I took it, because it definitely taught me a lot about some classical conditioning, redirection techniques, repetition, a lot of cool things. Really awesome course. It's on Udemy. .com. But yeah, it's I would say it's kind of like baseball where it like moves really slow, so maybe it's not good for clicks, it's not good
Right.
for entertainment. It's not good. You don't see, those night and day transformations like you would when using other tools, other versives. Yeah, so I agree. I agree that you don't see a lot of that stuff on YouTube, but I definitely have seen full-fledged systems, and I have seen progress. Is it as quick and as progressive as, let's say, the use of a balanced approach? No, no, not at all, not at all. But I definitely have pulled value from watching those.